Thank you. Thank you. Let me, first of all, thank you for coming out this evening. And let me thank Walter Mosley for the very moving introduction, and also for letting us know that Eddie Conway is now free. And of course, we have to work towards the day when we can say that Mumia is free, and Leonard Peltier, and all of the other political prisoners, not only here, but in places like Israel and other parts of the world. So let me begin by expressing my very deep gratitude to Mancha Diawara and to Jaira Placide and the Institute for African American Affairs for having organized this series of events over the course of this week-long residency at NYU. We've first discussed the possibility, let me move this out of the way. There's a live stream or something. But let me say that we first discussed this residency a little less than a year ago, the possibility of such a residency. We were in Accra, and when I thought about it, I thought how wonderful to be able to spend more than a day or two in New York. With all of the problems and shortcomings, I really love New York. And I love New Yorkers. Therefore, I seize on every opportunity to come here. But tonight, I do not fail to grasp the significance of the fact that I had to go to a great city on the continent of Africa, Accra, Ghana, in order to find my way to this great city of New York. And therefore, this residency started with a film from and about Africa. And for those of you who were not here yesterday evening, I really urge you to see the film Bamako. How many of you have seen it? Well, it's on Netflix, so you can see it tomorrow. I really urge you to see the film and also to learn about all of the amazing projects that Danny Glover and his business partner, Jocelyn Barnes, are doing. The name of their production company is L'Ouverture, after Toussaint L'Ouverture. And so I thought it would be fitting to begin this week with the film Bamako, because the film addresses a range of political, philosophical, aesthetic issues that we need to acknowledge if we want to effectively contest the powers that are responsible for the continued suppression of human potential in the global South, in immigrant communities and working class communities and communities of color all over the world. The title of my talk this evening is Feminism, Abolition, and Radical Reconstruction in the 21st Century. So let me first tell you how it relates to the film that was screened yesterday. Abdurrahman Sissako, who is the director of Bamako, produced this amazing and complex film that speaks to us through the trial that it stages in a courtyard in the city of Bamako, Mali. The trial is a trial of the World Bank, of the IMF, and the other agencies responsible for the structural adjustment policies that led to the shift of capital from human services, that is to say, from education and housing and healthcare, to profitable enterprises. But this trial, with its cast of lawyers, prominent citizens, and these are people who are recognizable, especially to African audiences. The trial takes place amid the everyday activities of the people who live in that compound. And incidentally, it's the compound where the filmmaker grew up as a child. And so you see women tie-dyeing fabric, and tie-dyeing is almost a lost art given the industrialization of fabric production in places as far away as China. There is a couple that desperately tries to save their relationship. The man is unemployed. The woman is a singer in a nightclub. The unemployed husband can think of no other way to imagine a hopeful future than to learn Hebrew. And we see him repeating Hebrew phrases from a book, because, as he says later, he asks, is there an Israeli consulate in Bamako? And the person he's talking to says, no. And he says, but there will be. And when that Israeli consulate is built in Bamako, I will apply for a position as a security guard. And parenthetically, it's really interesting that the company that hires more people on the continent of Africa than any other company is G4S, which is a security firm. And if we have time, perhaps we can talk about G4S later on. It's the third largest private company in the world, third only to Walmart and Foxconn. And it owns and operates jails and provides security and deports people across the Mexican border, as well as from Europe to countries in Africa. But in any event, as you watch the way Sisako has his cinematographer linger on the faces and the bodies and the activities of the people who live in the compound, there are beautiful lingering shots of many different women. And oftentimes they block the view. They walk right into the camera. So they block the view of the panel of judges or of the lawyer who's speaking about the devastation wrought by global predatory capitalism. The overlaying of the images of women and men and children who are not directly involved in those proceedings is an attempt, I believe, to emphasize the way in which everyday human lives are always in excess of the analyses that purport to understand them. But at the same time, if there is to be any real meaning of the legal complaint against the World Bank and the IMF, it has to be sought in the lives of ordinary people. And as I was saying yesterday evening, this is what I see as a feminist dimension of the film. Women and children are usually lumped together as an afterthought. And in this film, women take up much of the frame. But the feminist dimension is not so much about the presence of women as it is about the persistent effort, persistent even when it fails, to bring together the public and the private, the political and the personal, the institutional and the intimate. So this is why I'm suggesting this evening that feminism needs abolition, and abolition needs feminism. if we are going to bring about radical change in this century. Yes, that's a plot. And so if you saw the publicity, you may have noticed that I referred to radical reconstruction in the 21st century. And this is in order to reference the failed attempts at radical reconstruction in the 19th century. I mean, how can it be that 150 years after the putative abolition of slavery, we still live with so many forms of racism that we don't even know how to recognize them? During slavery and the era that led to the civil rights movement, we knew that we were banned from schools and hospitals and universities because we were black. They told us. Now, black people and Latinos and other racially marginalized groups are kept out of good schools, hospitals, and universities, but they are told that it's because they cannot afford it, or because their test scores were not good enough, or because they don't have the right insurance. And the few black and Latino people who can afford it, who do have the test scores, who do have the insurance, are allowed to enter these institutions, but the masses are kept out. And this is related to the structural racism that we don't know how to talk about, or that what we are not allowed to talk about. So this structural racism enables the periodic explosions of racist violence and the killings of young people like Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis and Jonathan Farrell and Kimani Gray in Brooklyn. We should also recognize Hadiya Pendleton, killed in Chicago, and Marissa Alexander, who's in prison in Florida. We're in New York. And since we're in New York, we should acknowledge the fact that grassroots struggles against the prison industrial complex in this city and in this state have begun to pay off a little. It is important to acknowledge our victories, even when they're small, because they provide evidence of the fact that we can make a difference, that we can make a difference in the world. And of course, it's important to say that stop and frisk, which is an example of the institutional racism that can be traced back to the period after the fall of radical Reconstruction in the 19th century, that it cannot be ended simply by settling lawsuits. The very institution of the NYPD has to be completely transformed. And perhaps we should say abolished. And not just the NYPD. Since the period of radical Reconstruction in the southern states, there has never been an effort to remake this society. And so let us remind ourselves that the overwhelming majority of our country's history has been a history of slavery. And there was the slavery that we recognize, 12 Years a Slave, which is, it's good that it won the Academy Award, but, well, maybe we'll talk about the but later on, because I have a lot of buts. So the overwhelming majority of our country's history has been a history of slavery. And there was a kind of slavery that persisted after the abolition, after the so-called abolition of slavery that persisted until World War II, the convict lease system. The convict lease system, which is the precursor of the current racialized mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex.